Peggy, you've heard a lot of English today. How wrong or right was it? You've heard a lot of English today. How right or wrong was it?
Does this thing work? Can you hear me? Right and wrong is not the correct word in the context of Indian English. And this is what I've been working on the book. Subsequent to this, every single language which comes to India initially meets a bunch of people who are fairly well educated, who contact these newcomers and put their language learning skills to work, and they learn the language very well. And so my definition of what they learn, it's not British English or it's not Vedic Sanskrit. It's something quite close. It's as close as what I'm speaking now is to English. I'm speaking pretty much Indian English, and that is the definition of a Prakrit. So the interesting thing about a Prakrit is that nobody's making mistakes, but it's leaking in quite a lot of local flavor, like too many nouns, for example, or a notion that the verb have does not exist. It is with me only. So it's not wrong. So it's very interesting that you manage to slip through obeying all the rules, but still giving it a flavor that it could never have had in its original country. So wrong, forget about that. And it's also not the poor people's language. The poor people are still in the process of making something here, with the English and so coming in, where you start seeing something that's happened over centuries in India, languages melding, when poorer people pull new words into their old language. I was kind of like listening to the Oriya being spoken here, and I was finding all of that there, that I'm hearing the Prakrit words, I'm hearing the earlier Magadhan structure, and you're seeing how it melded to make earlier languages like Hindi and Oriya, and now you're seeing a part-way process. So Indian English is still in its kind of early stages, I would say.
Right. So do you sometimes feel like a language inspector there? You see, oh, someone's right, someone's saying this and shouldn't be saying this, or someone's saying that and shouldn't be saying that. It's a little bit like being sort of a sergeant major of the language.
No, shouldn't be and should be tend to come when you hear somebody who's actually a foreigner trying their very best, a German saying, I do not did that, because he didn't know how to say, I didn't do. That's not what you get in English somehow. Whenever somebody has to speak English in India, they do it very, very well. But what is interesting is they only do the things they need to do.
Right.
For example, if you're a bookseller, and I know a few of these, they can sell you any book in English, and their English is immaculate. And if you figure, oh, well, why have I been speaking to this person in Hindi? So you start speaking to them about something else, like how to fix your car in English. It falls apart, because what's different about Indian English is it goes scene-wise. It doesn't go, this rule is for the past tense, this rule is for the present tense. No, this is how to sell books. This is how to speak to people's kids. This is how to speak to a journalist. So we master it scene-wise, which I find very exciting, and nobody talks about this.
Is it a very Indian thing?
No, we did it too in the Caribbean. I think you see it a lot in colonial situations where you have to learn a language because it's a language of power, but you know in what context you learn it. And so like Indians, it's easiest to see because we are sitting here as Indians. We basically have figured out that there's some people you don't speak to in English. And like many years back, I knew English, but I didn't know how to speak to people's children in English. It didn't come. Or in Washington, I want my car fixed, and I don't know how to speak to the mechanic in English. Thank God he didn't know English either. He spoke Spanish. So Spanish was fine. You could speak to somebody in Spanish, speak to their kids in Spanish, but if you want to talk to a journalist, English. And though I know Hindi, I don't exactly know how to talk about literary criticism in Hindi. It doesn't come. I find myself faltering. So there's something very differently divided up about Indian English, and it's such a big thing that, and when it's spoken well, with just a bit of an accent. In the old days in Sanskrit, we didn't think about, we thought everybody was so different because we always heard them. But Indian English, most of us will encounter in written form, in WhatsApps, in emails, and things like that. It doesn't seem in any way strange or wrong.
Are you a fan of English?
Yes, very much so, because I am curious. English, she says. Yes?
Yeah.
I think that we are seeing something happening again, which I imagine happened many, many times in our history, which is people who didn't know the dominant language, English or Sanskrit, or maybe the first language of the Indus Valley civilization, maybe the language that the Austroasiatics brought into this part of India 4,000 years ago. We're still trying to reconstruct all of that. In a way, let me see, where was I going with that? This is going to happen to me from time to time.
That's all right. It happens to all of us.
Yes.
Because you talk about English in the book and you say how Dil Mange More became such a big phenomenon.
Yeah. That is a lovely, complicated sentence. It's
Yeah.
got 3 Hindi words and 1 English word, but the basic structure is not Hindi. You can't say ye dil more mange because it doesn't sound right. So it's funnily got more Hindi in it than English, but it is demanding an English treatment, that the thing that you want more has to come at the end of the sentence. So I haven't figured it out completely in my...
And it's selling a multinational product, which is, again, an interesting thing. It's selling Pepsi.
Well, my students did tell me that the ad world caught on to it almost first. So some of them even wrote essays on how the ad world has used English. I think that what happens in India, and I don't know yet, because that part of history is very obscure to us, but how did people who didn't know English or Sanskrit start pulling in words, initially nouns, like Urdu from Persian, pull in the nouns. How did they somehow pull these into something that's not English, and that one day out of English will come some new product.
Some new language.
Yes, which will have a lot of English words, the way Oriya has a lot of recognizable Sanskrit and Prakrit words. It'll have all these words, but we will have the same word endings that clearly not from Sanskrit, clearly not from English. And somehow I feel we're in the middle of something that's happened many times before in India.
Is there something that we can understand about what's happening now from what has happened in the past?
The opposite. I would say, since we don't know what happened in the past and we do know what's happening now, it's a good thing to be able to look at ourselves as we do things and imagine that that's how the people in the Indus Valley would figuring out slowly what these Sanskrit speakers were saying, what the Prakrit speakers were saying, and then somewhere around the 10th or 12th century bursts this new thing called, which we now call Hindi or Punjabi or Sindhi, full of these words which are Prakrit and no, not really Sanskrit, Prakrit, but the grammar is not Sanskrit at all. So I expect that English has an unfinished story, and that we're going to see in years to come. Linguists are not supposed to we're supposed to behave like historians and see the past. But when you see enough of the past, you start being able to guess at the future. And I'm imagining that some interesting things are around the corner with things like English.
Right. You've described yourself in the book as a tiramisu bear.
Ah, yes.
Please explain that to all of us here in the context especially of language.
Okay, my daughter gave me this word because I told her, what do you call a mixture of a polar bear and a grizzly bear? Basically, there's only one way you can get this mixture, because polar bears cannot migrate south because they can't walk on ground. They have hair under their feet. They can only walk on snow, so they don't migrate. The males don't migrate. Females do not migrate, even in India. Historically, I was just reading a book on the plane here, which says, India is a land of unity and diversity. The unity comes from the maternal line and the diversity from the male line. So here we have this idea of which bear would migrate to meet the other kind. So it has to be the grizzly bear because they can walk a bit on snow and they migrate because they're male. And the female polar bear should have been on an ice floe, but climate change, where are the ice floes? So the mating seasons also get confused. So you find this brown bear from the south meeting this white bear from the north, and they have kids in a very particular way. Always the female is the local one, and the father is the migrant. In my case too, my father was a young Indian boy who went off to Canada to study in the 1940s, and that's the age when you fall in love. And where were the Indian girls? Very few. So you're falling in love with the locals. And so he met my mother. Now, our story is complicated because he brought her back. So then she was no longer the local one. She became the foreign one. But it is a pattern that you see not only in people, but in languages. So you have the local bedrock, which is the grammar, and to some extent the sounds. Every single Indian language, minus Assamese, has maybe Sindhi, Pashto have sh, retroflexes, all these with your tongue curls back. This is the bedrock. We live in Andamans has it too. So does Australia, Aborigines. So all of us who came out of Africa at that time have the and it's like a gene marker of a language that is Indian. And Indian English, except spoken by Anglo-Indians who live abroad, Indian English has turned, and people are always saying party. And that is it's a sign that the language has become Indian. It is completely native. I've got a little tilak mark on it. Now it gets this third.
But party is also American, no?
Huh?
Party is
Not
also,
really. Americans may get something like it. Norwegians get things like it. People in Georgia get. But this is a particular thing where party. It's more than simply Indian. It is also from, you'll see it in Punjabi more than Hindi, because Punjabi is an Indus Valley language. And Indus Valley had this Dravidian trait of, in between two vowels, t becomes, d becomes, and then they added r. So this is not a mistake. It's like an addition. So in a way, I feel we're in the middle of something that's happening. Like when I wanted to know what Anglo-Indians spoke like, you're writing and you don't want to get up from your table, so you just Google and you get a YouTube video. Somebody in Australia has interviewed a bunch of people. They sound like me, unlike many of us in the room. But when we speak English, we don't say t and d, we say t and d. Except for one politician, Derek O'Brien. He did it. But the point is that they were the first iteration. They met the British themselves, and they did not pick up this turned, which they could do if they had to speak to their Indian friends. The next iteration, the Babus, we're not yet even talking into the realm of mistakes or anything, made it a much more common thing. And this is something that had happened in the time of the Rig Veda. For 700 years before the Samhitas were made, these Brahmin families were living in isolation, and over that 700 years, all this turned, came into the language. And by the time the Samhitas were made, Sanskrit had become Indianized, with a little dot on it.
We don't know, though, what language the Harappans spoke, right? We have no clue.
We don't, but I'm trying to find out.
It's the biggest mystery of all, isn't it?
If you know how to look, you begin to find it. And I think that it would be great fun. First of all, I don't believe words matter. Words change. So forget about the words, forget about the nouns. I could speak English with Japanese words and it would work. It's a grammar. And if you look at the entire Indus Valley area, including into the Karakorams, you find a grammar which is older than Sanskrit. I mean, like verbs have gender. Hello? Sanskrit verbs don't have gender. You say ghar mein, this mein thing, that's very Dravidian, and it's also very tribal. It's not very Sanskrit. So you start pulling all the things in the language that are not in Sanskrit, and you begin to get a picture all over India of something that's older. And of course, all of us, not Bhubaneswar may not be the best place, but I see some North Indians around. This ne thing, main ne khana khaya, hum sab ne khana khaya. It's a very Indus Valley thing. It's snuck into Sanskrit over hundreds and maybe thousands of years. It took time to understand that sentences should not have subjects. We didn't believe in subjects. We believed in agents, main ne, not main. So then the compromise came. It came only in the past tense and so. But in ancient Indus Valley languages, I'm pretty sure that like all the languages which have this, like the Andamans, like Australia, like up in the Karakorams, all the tenses will have a ne. So we kind of get a sense of a language which did not like subjects, which had and various other things. You start pulling in from that. And if you see all the things that are still, because of the tiramisu bear, Hindi, Punjabi, Sindhi, every language of North India, and for all we know, or South India too, if you go back far enough, we're all tiramisu bears. We have a bedrock of the first Indians' way of speaking. Every time we look at our languages and we see these ne things, we see that verbs should have a gender, and so on, we are in the presence of something that's very old. And that's exciting. So we can guess from that what it could have been like. And we're reconstructing. I wasn't there. I didn't hear them. So I don't know what they spoke like, but this is, to me, the way to go. You look at the bones, and you say, this is the flesh that could be on it, but forget the flesh. This is the bones of the Indus Valley language. And you look back at languages like Oriya, and minus events that happened 4,000 years ago when the Vietnamese and the Burmese came in and took the women for themselves. But the basic structure of the language is mostly the same as the rest of India, except no gender. And that's because you got the ekta, duta, what do you say, gota? Ekta, John, ekjon. When that comes into a language, gender goes. So we know that if we go back 4,000 years with a language like Oriya, we're seeing a different picture and sameness with the other languages across the north of India.
Bengali too, right?
Yeah.
It has no gender.
Not only that, my own language. I'm from the Bhojpuriya. Yes, I am genuinely a Bhojpuriya. We have it too. In fact, I once wanted to find out why people did the ekjon, ekta, ego. And I read an article written by 2 Australians, and they had found something I wrote in 1978 and called these Mohan's rules. So every time you speak Oriya, you're using Mohan's rules
Not
for
bad.
your numbers.
I think we should applaud that for sure. So I wonder if there was a sentence, if you could create one for us, and if you could tell us what the perfect English way of saying it and the
What is Indian English?
Indian English way of saying it.
Can you get the thing? This
Could
is
we have the PPT, please?
I don't know how to do this.
Okay.
Find that thing where I have a bunch of
Yeah, I
sentences.
think, yeah, he'll just...
Yeah, a friend of mine who writes, and she's writing science fiction, so I was very excited about that.
Could
She
we have
said-
the PPT, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
The next one.
this is, that an important point. Indian English came up when the British left. It wasn't, so don't blame that one on the British. It filled a need here. We like elite languages. Can we go a few ahead?
Can we move ahead? I don't know how to
Just
use
go
it.
ahead.
Just move ahead.
Aage. Next.
Next, please.
Next.
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 This one. Next, okay.
This is, you all know this,
Yeah.
forget this. This one. A friend of mine wanted to write a book on science fiction. So she said, yeah, I want to send it for publication, and I want you to take a look at it. I said, okay, I'll do it for you. Can I do it on track changes? And can I take your words as data? Because I've been trying to work back to the features in old Indian languages, which is that we prefer nouns. I mean, in Malayalam, you can have a sentence with no verbs at all. We really do like nouns. So, and Sanskrit is very European that way. It has verbs, it has nouns, it has lots of verbs. But we don't like to have verbs. So I looked at her sentences, and you see, what she wrote is in the red. One could feel the advent of winter. Now, in standard British or American English, one could feel that winter was coming. Notice that she put everything into a noun. Progress was preliminary. Things were in their early stages. You can look through this. You want me to read it? Yes. I can.
Yes, please.
Even with a Western upbringing, even though he had grown up in the US, this journey I decided to undertake. I was the one who decided to come here to planet Earth. He looked at her to assess her state, to see if she was really up to going on a motorbike ride. The knowledge of past intimacy, because they had been so close in the past, she could not pinpoint the cause of her disquiet. She couldn't make out what was bothering her. She needed a man for identity and protection, to define and protect her. He would save her from the confines of this place, from being stuck here. There was a sense of loss and finality, of things coming to an end. See, nothing is wrong on the red sentences. It follows quite clear rules of English grammar. You can say that. But this is not, you'll notice there's a very noun heaviness in it. And English is much more verby. One thing I wanted, since I heard the bell, my Pavlovian brain has gone off. There is one other important thing about Indian English, and I'm sure it's true with other languages. I don't know if any of you remember that there was a time when you didn't speak English, and then one night you suddenly started full sentences and everything. It was like a pregnancy. You don't see the thing gestating, and it's, can you go ahead? I can show a picture of it, where my daughter just, Age, please.
Next one,
2 or 3
please.
slides. Next. Next. Yeah. See, this is my little daughter when she was about 4. She didn't understand English. I took her abroad twice. She didn't understand English. She didn't listen to us when we talked. And then one night, we said we're looking for a babysitter who to leave her with. And she started to cry. So she understood. She first understood. Not the way you do it in school. You learn to say, I am, you are. She understood. And within a week, she was sitting on the edge of a table, swinging her legs nervously, and she spoke in full English sentences. It was from the get-go, she started with the whole thing ready to be born, ready to breathe like a living baby. This is exciting. Who's studying this? Who's looking at it? I mean, these are research topics. How do Indians appear not to even be listening to English? And then one fine day, they're speaking it, and it's fine. It's like that, like the bookseller. He can sell books in English, but nothing else. And here, this little girl suddenly speaks English. And I said, oh, you're speaking English. She didn't know what I meant. She just merely had begun speaking, but I didn't care that it was different.
Peggy, yeah, that's very interesting, Peggy, because a lot of people, when I speak to some people, we talk about how they learnt English. It wasn't their first language. A lot of them tell me they learnt it from the movies. They learnt it from shows. They learnt it from following songs.
They didn't learn to speak it. They learned something that no teacher has yet understood, that before you can speak a language, you have to understand it. Like little babies, they get up and they tell you dog. They tell you flower. They tell you this, single words. And then they back off and they don't seem to talk, and you're ready to take them to a psychiatrist because maybe they're brain dead or something. And then about a year and a half or close to 2 years comes sentences. They have had to basically set the operating system up. You can't run a computer without a program. The program has to get installed, and the program is based on understanding and having a sense of what is likely to be said in this language.
So, what's the best way, according to you, to learn English? Since it is so much about the language of power and the language of employment and everything else, what's the best way? There's so many people teaching English now. How do you learn it?
You know, it's interesting. There's something called RapidX,
Right.
which is for teaching English for purposes of people who don't speak English at all at home.
Yeah.
They learn first to fill in forms. And until they get to around page 78, they don't talk at all because they know that poor Indians first need to fill in forms, read directions, read street labels. So that's for them. Now, so the question is asked, who needs to learn English? If it's
Right.
your kid, just keep speaking to them and understand that it's going to have no effect until they're ready. They need a certain amount. It's like a baby it can have arms and legs and eyes, but its lungs aren't ready to breathe. It's not ready to be born. So you basically need a bit of patience, and it's a research topic. I think we should become a place which specializes in teaching how to teach English, because it's not the same as, say, teaching a child from Sweden in the classroom. He didn't do, and there's so much bound up in English, and there are a lot of kids, I mean, me included. I didn't think I spoke English well until I was 14, and I was actually tongue-tied in front of people. I'm sure to make some mistakes because your identity, you're not yet fully formed, and then suddenly you're okay. So you have to expect these gestational things and big leaps happening, which is exciting because it's not what they tell you about in school.
What language do you dream in?
I don't know. People think I speak a lot of languages because I'm likely to pick up a Munda tribal data and say, yeah, let me read that. Or I look at something in Malayalam, but not really. I don't know. I'm not even sure. People would ask. At the moment, I know English best, but if I had to say something, I would say it in Hindi. You notice I immediately spoke to the person handling the presentation in Hindi because Hindi is what you speak on anything to do with the film set, the lights, the electricity, accounts, anything on a film set is done in Hindi. So he's like on a film set. So it happened automatically. I wasn't assuming he didn't know English. So I don't know, I think it's so exciting and so different, and there's so much that we haven't noticed that instead of saying that things are wrong, look at them and think that maybe this is, in some ways, maybe not a better way, but maybe a more organic or living way, the way English is coming in India. And it's not finished. English will finish when English has absorbed it, I think. Something's going to happen, and it's not happened yet.
Yeah, but do you still, what do you feel about this whole debate about Hindi versus English versus, can we not have coexistence?
They should. In fact, one of the things that's really wrong is when they say, oh, this school is so good, this government school, we're going to teach the children in English medium. But they need to put in the local language something for the teacher, because the teacher also doesn't know for sure. Haven't you ever had this experience that you want to respond to something someone has said, but you're not exactly sure you got everything? And you need to make sure, and the only solution for teaching English is to make sure the kids know what you're saying. So like when I would teach little EWS kids English or for music, I'd first tell them everything in Hindi and answer all their questions, and good questions. What is a pond? What is a lake? Which is a jheel? All these things. And you have to make sure that they understand. But we think that these silly kids are going to pick it up because there's some magic that happens in the head if they hear the thing enough. No, they need to know what you're saying.
Wonderful. Yeah. I know Madhulika and Swapna were talking about the importance of a good editor. Here's one. So if you ever need a day job or a night job, I think being an editor is one. Thank you so
I
much.
just edited my own manuscript the night before coming here. Yes, I know.
Thank you so much. It was such a
you.
joy to listen to you.